Michelle Savage with XBRL US, and you are here for our session on cover page tagging for Phase 2 filers. This is the second in a series on cover page tagging in XBRL for filers that are just this year going to begin filing in Inline XBRL with the SEC. And we're very happy to have with us today Scott Tice. Scott is CEO of NovaWorks, and he is also the chair of our domain steering committee. And we also have Steve Horowitz. Steve is the manager of technical services and web applications, also at NovaWorks. And they're going to be walking us through a number of important topics. I wanted to mention a couple things. If anybody has technical difficulties as we get started, please email us at support, S-U-P-P-O-R-T, at xbrl.us, and we'll do our best to get you back online. And if you are getting CPE credit for the session today, please make sure that you respond to the CPE questions that will be taken at 2 points during the session today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Scott. And Scott, take it away.
Okay, thanks a lot, Michelle. Well, I should have contacted support. I was thinking about doing this presentation from my office, which you're not supposed to go to, and I happened to go there today for a meeting. And of course, I come back home and the internet goes down right at the start of this. But at any rate, I appreciate everybody being able to join today. We really approached this about 2-3 months ago with what have we learned about tagging during the first part of the phase, and then coming into phase 2, and we felt that there's going to be a lot of people who are going to want to know what's going on, who maybe know what's coming up and haven't paid a lot of attention to it, but it's going to be something that they're going to have to face this summer. So we thought we'd come in on this. So this is the deep dive for the second part of the cover page tagging. So what I'm going to do is talk about an overview of the requirements and hit some of the takeaways, some of the big things that folks are going to need to know as you're going through this. And it really is what needs to be tagged. I mean, you're going to be phased in an inline XBRL as well, but now you're going to have the cover page requirement that applies to a number of different forms and actually has to be tagged. You know, what are the requirements and at what point, where do the rules come in here? What says you have to do things a particular way or have to tag things? You know, what's the underlying SEC requirements? How to tag, understanding the data and the elements associated with it. What are some of the resources? And then asking the right questions for vendors. So keep in mind that this is just part of the cover page tagging as part of the overall inline XBRL transition. First, as we talk about the rules, you know, what has caused this to come into play? The original mandate was 33-9002, which was for the for XBRL, which everybody's been doing now for quite a few years. With the FAST Act coming in with simplification of regulation SK, there were a number of things that came into play, and you'll be able to get these links, I think, as well. Afterwards, but these are the things you're going to want to look at from the SEC that actually specify what's part of that act and then what comes into play when it deals with inline XBRL. And there is an addendum that was made to that as well. You'll find there's a number of other things that are referenced, but most of the stuff that you're going to be interested in terms of what actually is required is going to be in the Edgar Filer Manual, which I would remind everybody that is part of the rules. It's incorporated as part of Regulation ST. So Chapter 6 of Volume 2 has everything about XBRL, and it's a very easy read. Haha, if you have looked at it before, but this is going to have the bulk of the stuff that's actually required for you to go through and file. So let's take a look at that. This is off of the SEC site. So I'm at SEC.gov info. You can get this by all information for Edgar filers, PDF, and that's the volume 2. Remember, you want to be in volume 2. And we start off with 6521, which is going to have the basic information that's required, that's added to your existing XBRL that you're already filing. And there's a number throughout the section when we talk about this of these tables that specify which forms require which particular items, and there's plenty of notes and things in here. One of the things that I'll get to in a moment, that we did with this is we distilled this down last year into an easy to follow guide. So you don't have to like look through this and go, we gotta tag this, do I have to tag that? We actually show you visually what has to be tagged, which is much easier to deal with. So coming back here, then you'll see that we have all these different rules. There's some skips in here for various places, but they're going to talk about the things that have to go into the cover page. Most things are not hidden, except for things like the entity CIK and things like that. And there'll be strategies too to deal with certain data that has to conform with the SEC database, but yet may not be the way you want to have it as a plain English thing on the cover page. So there's a second part of this too, and you can see there's a chunk here. What did we come up with? I guess about 15 or 20 pages. It bears going through and giving it a read to see what's being done. And here are the forms that this is going to apply to. Now, depending on your role, I mean, if you're an agent, you're going to be dealing with pretty much all these forms. If you're part of a filing department or a compliance department within a corporation or a law firm, you may only deal with a certain spectrum of these. Each of them have their own particular requirements, but they do share a lot of commonality. And as a reminder too that XBRL, we're going to have a risk return coming up with an expansion for Inline as well. Starting up here with a phase in, and it's a larger subject that we're not going to really cover today, but if you have any involvement with that, then you're going to need to be paying attention to that as well. We've already covered this. I want to do it here just in case there are new folks joining the meeting, but there's basically 3 phase-ins as part of this. The large accelerated filers have already come into play. So they're already in the mix and they're already doing it. So we've had essentially about 9 months, 10 months to really learn from this and see what kind of things are easy, what are hard, what are some of the issues. And so there are some things that have come up that the SEC has dealt with and that we've had workarounds for. The next group that's coming up is the accelerated filers. So basically what that's going to mean is after June 15th, the first non-K form that you're going to be filing, the first quarterly report, which for most people will end up being the one that's due on the June 30th, which would generally be August 1st to the 15th, depending on whatever the deadline setup is with the SEC. That's going to be the first form that's going to have to file. That's going to be the one you're going to have to pay attention to when it comes to putting cover page tagging in. And then finally, the following year, next year, we'll end up having everybody else jump on the bandwagon here. So we'll all be phased in at that point. There are some questions with respect to domestic versus foreign filers, but basically, as I mentioned, it's the first queue that's coming up, and it's ending after the applicable date. So for a calendar year 12/31, you're going to be June 30th for the second quarter. So then comes your first filing. If you want to try and do this, say for an 8K or any form, so you have an 8K coming up, you want to try and do the cover page, you can do that. You can do that, and you can volunteer to do inline tagging for your cover page. And if you decide you don't want to do your next form, you don't have to. But when you come to the point where you actually are phased in, then you must, it's mandatory to go ahead and do that. But what's kind of nice about the volunteering is, it's not like, hey, I'm going to jump in the pool and I have to stay there. Although at this late date, I don't know there'd be too much point in volunteering in. So we'll look at a couple other things. One thing is we have a cover page template, which I mentioned before. It gives you a visual aspect of this. This is available at 2 different places. It's available on our website. I think we revised the blog on this. The only difference between this template and the one we showed last year and made available is we took the preliminary language off of it because it's all, seen the test of time at this point. It's the same thing here with the cover page fact sheet. What I'm going to do is quick take a look at that. So what we're looking at when you download this is a little PDF file. It's about 20 pages, and it tells you what this is all based on here. We can review some of the compliance dates. You have this, the very things we're talking about here. And then we start talking about each of the forms. And this is done nice and visually so you can see the different things, the different element names or concept names that would apply. And Steve will get into this. There's some kind of weird stuff with the addresses that are kind of fun with the SEC, the way they're holding back on some of the older form style. And you see here that each one of the elements is laid out, which is nice. along with some of the differences too with how things are handled. There's a little bit in terms of check boxes, there's some differences here. Also, the idea of using Unicode characters for check boxes is unchecked or open, because those want to be Boolean values in certain circumstances. Some of them are yes, no, some of them are Boolean. So we go in then to the 10K, and we cover all the stuff that goes on with that. The 8K, again, obviously a very common form. Depending on how active your firm is, you might file, a dozen of these a year. And then we come through and cover all the other forms, the 20F and the 40. Again, very similar format, all based on the SEC templates. And then we have a table here that covers each one of the elements that are specified and where they're specified, what the data types are, and some of the remarks associated with it. So this consolidates everything that's in the Edgar Filer Manual and puts it in an easy to read table, so you can see all the different pieces that are part of the DEI taxonomy and the additional, I forget the name of the taxonomy that attaches to do some of these other things. So that's all available. It's free. Just go ahead and grab it, and enjoy it. Hopefully get some benefit out of it. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Steve, and he's going to talk about transformations and hidden facts. So let me just swap over screens.
Thanks, Scott. Share my screen now, and should be showing now. Okay, so as Scott said, we're going to talk a little bit about transformations and hidden facts. This should be a review for anyone who was on the meeting last week. But we're going to start off talking about what are transformations. So transformations are effectively rules for converting text that appears on a document in a filing to a normalized value that XBRL is actually expecting. So you might have something in a format the SEC is not expecting for XBRL, you have to convert to something else, and transformations can help with that. So when should filers use transformations? Well, you're going to want to use transformations in any situation where you have textual data that needs to be conformed to something the SEC is expecting. So as an example, you might have a value 1 like spelled out as 1, which needs to be converted to a numeric 1. Well, there's a transformation that can handle that on the back end. You might also need to transform a period of time, such as 10 years, into an ISO date format, such as P10Y, for duration elements in XBRL. And transformations can definitely do that for you. And you want to try to avoid using custom transformations. I know there are provisions that they're not really very well supported in Edgar, so you want to just try to stick with standard transformations wherever possible. So what do transformations look like, and how can you tell they're being used? The simple way of looking at it is whenever you look at the SEC's viewer and you click on a fact, like for example, the highlighted value here is the word no. And no obviously is not a number, but it's being transformed into the fact value of 0 with one of these XBRL transformations. So this allows you to tag one thing and have it mean something very similar, just it translates it on the back end for you. So you're not going to really see much of this transformation on the viewer, other than you can click on something that might not exactly represent the number that's being tagged. So let's take a look at some of the typical cover page transformations you might see. Probably one of the most common would be the Boolean ballot box transformation. This will convert Unicode checkbox characters to true or false values. So Scott mentioned that briefly when he was talking about the cover page run through. Checkboxes are extremely common on these filings. So you might have the checkbox 9744 or 9746. Either of those checkboxes or unchecked boxes you would need to convert to true or false in order for the SEC to actually understand what the value means. And this transformation can do that. So going along with that, there's also Boolean true and Boolean false. If you're not using one of those standard Unicode characters, maybe you're using brackets with an X in the middle. these transformations can take anything and turn it into true or false depending on what it is. So you can use whatever you want to represent checkboxes with these transformations. There's also date, month, year, N, which will convert a date to a standard ISO format for XBRL. And then there's the state province conversion, which will convert state or province codes to EDGAR standard codes. So if you have on your cover page your jurisdiction of incorporation, maybe you have New Jersey. Well, the SEC is expecting NJ, so that transformation will convert it for you. It'll also convert things like unknown to the code XX, which is being expected. So let's talk about some transformation issues that can commonly pop up, because I get questions about this fairly frequently. One possible transformation error you might see would be the lexical mismatch error. This is a pretty common one. If you get the error back from the SEC after you file it, and it says schema value error, and it has the wording in here, lexical pattern mismatch, so you can tell that's what this error is. And in this case, I have a tagged value, the number 5, and it's expecting an ISO date format. And this error means I did not give a transformation, I just didn't use one. So the duration is expecting an ISO format, and I gave it something it didn't understand. So I get a lexical pattern mismatch. So you just have to apply the correct transformation there. And your software you're using to actually create the XBRL should have a way for you to apply that. Or it might be applied automatically, and you might never see this error message. That will depend on the actual vendor you're using for XBRL.
If I can interject just for a second, Steve.
Sure.
One of the things about these messages, and anybody who's done SEC filings can be kind of frustrated by them. You'll say location line number 0. The key thing to look at here is the element name. And when you see a schema value error, that means the software has as it goes through and parses or picks up each component, it says, this particular element or concept is associated with this kind of data, and it mismatched. And that's part of the schema. So that's why you get this kind of cryptic error. But the best way to go for it is to look at what is the particular element name, and then what is the thing that's expecting.
Exactly. On this one, I was using the test custom element license agreement term, so I could just search my document for that element and find it that way a lot faster than scanning through the document. So it tells you what element is having the problem, so you can actually go ahead and find that. But our next common error is just a transformation error. And you can tell what this one is because it has the wording under the error message, transform value error. And in this case, it's saying that the inline element, entity, incorporation, state, country code, the transformation is having a transformation value error. And it shows in the actual error code, value error New York, and I put an exclamation point on there just so it would be wrong. So I tagged New York with an exclamation point, and it's expecting the value NY. So the transformation is supposed to take New York and turn it into NY. But the transformation can't take New York with an exclamation point because it doesn't match what the transformation is expecting. So here I'm getting a transform value error because I'm giving the transformation an invalid input value. So you can tell the difference between this and a lexical error because the lexical mismatch would be I didn't apply a transformation. With a transform error, I'm applying a transformation, I'm just doing it wrong. So they're two slightly different errors that mean different things. So you just be aware of both of those. Another fairly common error, you're probably going to see this one a lot, hidden fact eligible for transformation. You're going to get a warning on each and every fact you tag in your document that is using a hidden, that is being tagged as a hidden fact when it's possible for it to be displayed in the document. So if it's possible for it to be displayed and you have it as hidden, it's going to throw this warning regardless of whether it should be hidden or not. So some things like the central index key element, that's not expected to be visible at all because there is no transformation for that. So when you tag that as hidden, it's never going to throw any kind of warnings. If you tag something like the entity registrant name though as hidden, well, every 8K you do, every 10Q you do is going to have a registrant name on the cover page. So that probably shouldn't be a hidden fact barring some special circumstances. So if you hide that, it's going to throw a warning like this. And it is just a warning. It's not going to prevent filing. It just means that you need to be absolutely sure you're tagging this hidden for a good reason. So let's talk a little bit about hidden facts then. We just mentioned that. Basic hidden facts. Every document, when you tag it with Inline XBRL, is going to have a IX hidden section in the HTML. And this is in the code view. You're not going to have to edit this directly. Generally, your software is going to create this for you. And this IX hidden section contains any of these hidden facts that are in the XBRL document but are hidden from the user. And what generally goes in here are going to be data points that are not presented anywhere in the actual document. So things that aren't visible on the document but are still required for compliance purposes. And example data points pictured below would be the CIK and the amendment flag. These are both required. You have to have your CIK in your XBRL, and you have to have whether it's an amendment or not. So those are required data points, but you're not going to look at a cover page and see your CIK on it. You're not going to see an amendment flag saying false. That's not going to be there. So they're presented as hidden facts to comply, but not actually disturb the look of your document. Now, these facts are in this hidden section, and they're in a display none div tag, which are usually in the body of your document. So we can see a little snippet of code below, and it shows the body of our document, which contains this div, which has this IX hidden in the header. And we can see our two facts here for our CIK and our amendment flag being set. So they are visible in the viewer. The SEC's viewer, you have a hidden fact viewer in there, but they're not going to be in the actual document. You're not going to be able to click on them or anything like that. And these are what we call non-referenced facts because they're not referenced anywhere in the actual document. So if we go ahead and look at the next slide, then we have hidden facts that are actually being referenced. And the rules for this can be found in the Edgar Filer Manual, section 52514. But if we distill that out to make it a little bit more clear, these are visible hidden facts. So they're still going to be in the hidden IX hidden section, but you can actually use that IX hidden section and point that to actual points in your document. This allows the viewer to render the fact in the interactive view, even though it's a hidden fact. So you can use this to tag images or to tag text that is displayed one way but tagged another. So let's take a look at our example here. This is an IX hidden section containing an entity registrant fact name. So you can see, like our slide from the our previous slide, we have our IX hidden section, and inside of that I have facts for my CIK, my amendment flag, my entity registrant name, and my entity incorporation state country code. So in the hidden section, my entity registrant name is tagged as my company. That is the company name in the hidden section. There's also an ID attached to that. So you can see the ID value. It's just whatever value it's arbitrary. You don't have to name it anything specific, but we have it named ending in 13. So that's that XDX2IXBRL 10013. If you use that unique identifier and you use a span tag in the actual body of the document, so you can see below here, it shows a span tag around excellent company. The effect when you file that is I have a hidden fact for my registrant name, and my registrant name actually is my company, but it's going to show in the actual file document as though it was excellent company, and I can click on that and see the actual underlying value. So this allows you to tag one thing as though it was something else. And this will generate a warning when you file it that you're using hidden facts that have available transformations. So just be aware of that this will cause a warning. But there might be a very good reason for doing this if, for example, you don't want to show part of your company name on your actual HTML. Maybe your company name has got some kind of abbreviation or something in there you want to leave off and only show the main part of it on your actual filing. So let's talk about some hidden text in special cases then. You can actually use the CSS property display none to hide chunks of a document, of an HTML document, prevent them from being displayed. Now, generally you want to avoid tagging facts that are in a hidden section of the HTML document. If it is tagged inline, it should be visible to the user unless it is in the IX hidden section. That IX hidden section is really the only place you should be putting hidden facts. So just make sure you keep them in that section and do not use display none to actually tag facts. So as far as special cases, I mentioned before that company names, you might have a different company name, or you might want to display part of the company name on the actual HTML. That's one of the cases I see more frequently using hidden facts, where you would use a hidden fact that is referenced, and you would just tag the hidden fact as part of the company name and reference the actual name in the document. So that can be done. You can also use hidden facts to tag the co-registrant data. So if you're doing a filing with a co-registrant, not all of the time you're going to have all of the co-registrant data show up on the filing you're actually doing as visible. So you might have to do hidden facts for co-registrant data even though transformations exist for it. For example, if you have a co-registrant with their address not being actually visible on the cover page, you might want to add that address as hidden facts to the document. And this will generate warnings when you file that you're using values that can be transformed, but if it's not visible on the HTML document, you would have to include it as a hidden fact then. So turn it over to Michelle for a couple of CPE questions.
That's great. Thanks very much, Steve. Yeah, I am going to go ahead and share my screen. So actually, you know what, before I do that, before I go and jump to sharing my screen, let's take a couple of questions that have come in.
Sure.
And the first question, Steve, is for a CIK, which is a hidden fact, is there any way that we can add a reference in the cover page, I guess, so that it is not a hidden fact, but it's actually there? So I guess the idea is to actually have the CIK be visualized.
Yeah, I mean, there's no reason why you couldn't have the CIK visually tagged. I mean, you could definitely have it there. You'd have to actually display it on the document, which I've never really seen people do, but there's no technical reason why you couldn't do it that way.
Okay. Okay, great. And then we have one more question. Actually, just bear with me a second. Screen issues here. One more question is, currently a filer might file their Form 20F or 40F in such a way that the financial statements are not on the same HTML page as the cover page. They may appear in an exhibit. How can you create a single inline XBRL tag over multiple HTML pages? So I think this may be a reference to things like continuations.
That's actually a really good question, and I've seen that before. So you're talking about where your primary document has inline XBRL and an exhibit also has inline XBRL. And that's totally possible to do the way it is right now. I mean, your inline XBRL documents are effectively taking the place of your instance document in older style XBRL. So your XSD file, your lab file, your pre, your def file, those are all still link-based files. So you can tag that. You would just need to make sure that the way the SEC handles it, they combine both of your files together into the same instance document. So you have to have unique contexts between both of your documents. You can't like use the same context in both. So I'm not sure if that's a bug on how the SEC is handling it, or if that's intentional or not, but there are some limitations to the way the SEC does it, but it is possible to do it that way, where you would have just two instance documents and a single set of link-based files.
We'd recommend that you put them together and test file it and see if you have conflicts. Like Steve said, it will combine them to make a single instance.
Yeah.
But you have to be careful about conflicts.
Yep.
That's the big thing, because as it combines it together, anything that's the same is going to cause an issue.
Okay, so I'm having a little screen sharing problem here. And I think it's my PowerPoint just shut down. So just give me a second. I'll try to bring it up. For some reason, my computer is painfully slow these days, but just give me a sec.
I'm sure everybody's gotten used to seeing kids running in and dogs barking and meetings. And
Yeah, so I guess this isn't so bad, huh? All right. Okay, so give me a second here. And I'm going to bring up our poll questions. Maybe I should just get PowerPoint to cooperate. Oh, there we go. Sorry about that. Okay, so our poll questions. And also, as we go through this, I forgot to mention to everybody that we are taking questions, and we have had a couple people submit questions. We have another one that just came in. Please click on the Q&A link to submit your questions, and then we'll take them as they come in at various breaks during the session. So let's go to the first poll question here for those of you getting CPE. What is the FACT Act compliance filing date for large accelerated filers? This is for large accelerated filers. So is it for fiscal periods ending on or after June 15th, 2018, for fiscal periods ending on or after June 15, 2019, or for fiscal periods ending on or after June 15th, 2020? So we'll take about another 30 seconds or so here. And again, this is for large accelerated filers. Okay, just another 10 seconds. Okay, I'm going to be shutting down the poll right now. Okay, we'll go to our second question. What are transformations? Okay, and the first option is they are data points that are not presented anywhere in the HTML and are included to meet the requirements of XBRL. They are methods used to transform traditional XBRL into inline XBRL, or they are rules for converting text that appears in a filing to a normalized value. So we have about another 30 seconds here. Okay, just another 10 seconds and then we'll be closing down the poll. And in the last few seconds, I'm going to pose this question that came in for Steve and Scott. So is it accurate to say that if I'm a foreign private issuer and I am not opting for early adoption, it means I don't have to tag the cover page until 2021? I'm going to shut down the poll now. Thank you for answering those. So Scott and Steve, do you want to try to answer that question? If I'm a foreign private issuer and I am not opting for early adoption, does it mean I do not have to tag the cover page until 2021?
I think I would go to CorpFin and ask them. I'm pretty sure that you don't, but I would go ask them.
Yeah, to the best of my knowledge, you don't have to either until 2021 if you're a foreign private issuer, but I don't, yeah, that's like I'm 90% sure of that, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the case because I think they fall into wave 3,
yeah,
which will be next year. So it's kind of large accelerated last year, accelerated this year, and then everybody else next year. But again, Scott's right. You should always check with CorpFin or check with your own legal.
Yep.
Okay, so with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Steve.
Great.
Stop sharing.
Share my screen again then. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about cover page elements and the element choices you're going to be making and how you actually can tag these. So when you're going through the Edgar Filer manual, Scott suggested you take a look at it, and I would definitely second that. It has a lot of useful tables in there, and it's going to be talking about cover page and DEI elements. So all of these elements are available in the DEI taxonomy, which is a separate taxonomy from the US GAAP taxonomy, but it is automatically imported into US GAAP and IFRS. So if you're doing a IFRS filing or a US GAAP filing, you will have access to these DEI elements. They're all going to use the same cover page elements pretty much as well. So it's not like you're going to have a different set for IFRS versus US GAAP. They're pretty similar. So I have a picture of the table of required elements, and these are non-null elements that are required, so you actually have to include these. This is from the Edgar Fowler manual from chapter 6.5.45. And these elements are going to be either described as DEI or cover. It's a question I've gotten a couple of times. This doesn't mean they're in different taxonomies. It just means the DEI ones are required for regular XBRL, and the cover ones are required for just cover. So they're all required for, inline XBRL, but the ones that are flagged as DEI are generally required only for regular traditional XBRL doesn't require the cover ones. But you have things like your amendment description, your document type, your amendment flag. These are required in all of your XBRL. So let's talk a little bit about address elements. EFM Chapter 6 describes the address elements you're going to use, as well as what forms they're expected on. If you are tagging former addresses, you would use the exact same set of elements. You would just make sure you tag these with the dimension entity address type axis, and you'd use the member former address member. So you make sure you use that axis member combination to tag a former address. But this should allow you to tag pretty much any address in here. You'll have address line 1, 2, and 3, city or town, state or province, a country and a postal code. And with phone numbers, you also have to break the phone number up into city, area code, and local phone number. So that's something that you have to get a little bit used to. You can't just tag the whole phone number as one data point. It's going to be 2 data points. IFRS addresses are going to use a very similar set of elements, which is also in that chapter 6 of the Edgar Fowler manual. The primary difference between the IFRS addresses and the US GAAP addresses are that the IFRS one, you have to have a contact person's fax and email address. So if you're filing a 20F or 40F, just keep that in mind. You have to have a contact person, their fax number, and their email address tagged on the cover page. And these are all marked as cover, not DEI. So these are required only if you're doing inline cover pages. They're not part of standard traditional XBRL. Although they still can be used, they're just considered optional in that case. So another big section for cover page tagging is going to be the securities table. So chapter 6 of the Edgar Fowler manual also covers what elements you're going to be using on the securities table and how to apply them. So there's security 12B title. There's also security 12G title. If you have a 12B table, you just use the 12B title. If you have a 12G table, you use the 12G title. We also have an element for no trading symbol flag. This can be true. Well, this has to be true. You use this element if you don't have a trading symbol. So the trading symbol is not required. You do have to have the title, and you do have to have the exchange. But if there is no trading symbol, you would just use no trading symbol flag and set that to true. So the trading symbol is a normalized string item, so it's expecting specific values to be tagged there. The trading symbol is expecting things like New York Stock Exchange, oh, not the trading symbol, I'm sorry, the exchange is expecting Edgar exchange code. So it's expecting specific exchanges like NYSE or the Chicago Stock Exchange. It expects very specific values there. So you have to make sure you're using acceptable exchanges. Now, if you happen to have multiple securities on your table, well, we only have one set of elements that can be used. You have your 12G title, you have your ticker symbol, and you have your exchange name. So you have your one set of elements. In order to tag multiple securities, you have to use a dimensional element to differentiate these values. So if you have multiple securities, you're going to want to use the dimension statement class of stock axis or classes of share capital access to differentiate these values. And you can use a member that's a custom member based on whatever security you're tagging. So you'll have custom members for each security you're marking in here. And the Edgar Filer Manual does make it pretty clear that you can't use dimensions for one row and not use dimensions for the other. If you start doing a dimensional table because you have multiple securities, every row of your table should be using dimensions to mark the securities. So just make sure you're consistent with your use of dimensions on your securities table. So going along with your securities table tagging, you also have multiple exchanges. If you have multiple exchanges for the same security, you can use the entity listings exchange axis. So we can differentiate the exchanges. And unlike the securities, when you're using custom elements for your security members, you do not have to use custom elements for your exchange members. The exchange taxonomy, which should be included in both GAAP and GAAP and IFRS filings, is going to have a list of exchanges that you should be using. So for example, the exchange element XNYS should be used for the New York Stock Exchange. And you want to avoid using custom definitions here. I can't think of a situation where you would want to use a custom definition, but I'm sure there's some kind of niche border case I'm not aware of. But you want to avoid using custom definitions here when possible. So let's take a look at an example stock table. This example is from the Edgar Filer Manual. So let's look at the HTML example of it here. We might have common class A for the Chicago Stock Exchange, and then common class B. And we also have a 2.375% notes due 2020 with no trading symbol for New York Stock Exchange. So we can see in our little table here from the EFM a breakdown of how we're tagging this. And we have 4 contexts with this. So for example, the first context we might use might be, and we're just using an identifier here, CANY. And we're going to tag on the first row, common class A with our 12B title member, our trading symbol with our trading symbol member, trading symbol element, and our stock exchange with our security exchange member or element. And we're going to use on each row 2 dimensions. Our first row is going to get the statement class of stock axis, and that statement class of stock axis is going to be common class A member because we're using a common class A member for that row. And we're also going to use the entity listings exchange axis for our first row with the New York Stock Exchange member. And we're going to use the same dimensional elements for our second row with the one exception that our exchange member, instead of being the New York Stock Exchange member, it's going to be the Chicago Stock Exchange member. So common class B for our third row is going to be very similar. You would again use statement class of stock axis and entity listings exchange axis. You would just create a custom member for common class B member for your statement class of stock. And for your entity listing, you would use the New York Stock Exchange member. And for our last row, you would again apply both of those dimensions. You'd have a new custom stock exchange, a new custom class of stock member. You would have the New York Stock Exchange member being applied under your entity listings exchange axis. And the one difference here is that you would use the element no trading symbol flag. You would set that to true and put that in the same context to signify that that particular row does not have any kind of trading symbol. But that would be how you apply your dimensional breakdown to a table with multiple exchanges and multiple securities. So let's take a quick look at some example forms. This is a breakdown of the 10Q header. So this is from the document that Scott showed earlier that's available for the XBRL US website or on the NovaWorks website. The header here for a 10Q, you can see it uses the document quarterly report and document transition report on these 2 checkboxes. These checkboxes are the bracket style, so they're not going to be using Unicode characters. You would, whatever software you're using to tag this would want to use a transformation for Boolean true or Boolean false in those. You have your document type here, which will just be tagged as a standard inline fact. Document period end date, your period start date, your period end date. These should all be tagged as just inline standard facts. Your registrant name is tagged here, and a little call out here says it can be a hidden fact. So if you have a graphic there, for example, that's fairly common. If you want to have a graphic there, you can tag your registrant name as a hidden fact and then reference that hidden fact on your image. That way your image is clickable and shows up as your actual tagged value. And again, that would throw a warning when you file it to the SEC, but you're just making it a hidden fact for technical reasons. So you can have a graphic or an image there, so that shouldn't cause any sort of problem. So on the address section, you can see we have our, at the top, entity incorporation state country code. So you have transformations available for that. You can apply to transform it into a valid 2-digit state country code. Just be aware that the transformation is expecting the initial letter to be capitalized, not the full thing. So I've seen people say like New York in all caps. That will not be valid transformation value. That will cause errors. So you want to make sure you have initial caps only, or you use an appropriate CSS property to transform it. But you have your address elements below here. So address line 1, line 2, a couple of these are required. Like if you don't have address line 1, when you go ahead and file this, it will throw warnings saying you're missing required elements. It is just a warning, but you should have your address fully listed on here. If you have former addresses, that would show up in a similar area down here. Former addresses, you could list that out here if you have one. You'd use the same elements. You would just use them with the former address axis. So let's look at the securities table, which we just talked about. You would use your 12B title, your trading symbol, and your security exchange elements here. If it's a single row table, you don't have to use any dimensions. If your table has 2 or 3 rows, well, 2 or more rows, then you would want to use your class of stock axis to differentiate the different classes. And if it has multiple exchanges per row, then you would also have to use your exchange axis. There's also more information on a 10Q than there is on an 8K. So you have things like your filer category. Your filer category, you would highlight the actual wording on here for the filer category. Like if you're a large accelerated filer, you would tag the wording large accelerated filer. If you are a smaller reporting company, you would tag the value non-accelerated filer, and then you would tag the small entity checkbox here, the entity small business checkbox as a true value. You would tag the emerging growth true or false, depending on whether it's true or false. Some of these are not checkbox values. For example, entity current reporting status. In this case, the SEC is expecting a yes or no value. So on things like this, you would tag the word yes or the word no, depending on your response to that. Let's look at an 8K example. We can see the document cover page here. You have the document type at the top. So it's very similar to the format of a 10K or a 10Q. They're all pretty closely related here. Some of the major differences are once we get past the header information, we have some checkboxes along the bottom here. So these are going to be common across all 8Ks. And these are all using that Boolean ballot box transformation or the true or false transformation to tag the actual checkbox value. So you can use either Unicode checkboxes here or whatever symbols you want, and just use the Boolean true or Boolean false transformation to mark these checkboxes as true or false. And we have the exact same layout for the trading symbol for our securities table. So the securities table is going to be tagged the same way you would tag it on a 10Q. If you have a 12G table, it would be showing up here as well. And if it's emerging growth, you just check the box for emerging growth using the Boolean transformation. The same way for the transition period checkbox, this would be a Boolean true or false value. but overall it's very similar process to the 10Q for an 8K. So if you're familiar with tagging one cover page, you can pretty much figure out the rest of them. It's just a slightly different layout. But with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Scott for our summary and closeout. Scott?
Okay, thanks, Steve. And I see that went right to the beginning. Stop that, PowerPoint. So a couple of things to keep in mind. If you have not started this yet, now is a real good time to get going. We've covered some of the information here, and we'll be answering a couple of questions also came in, so we'll be answering that. So as you're getting started, you want to know what is it that you need to tag, and that's going to be found in that template that you can just download that and take a look at it. Understand what your software or service vendor does. You know, how do they tag things? How do they validate it? How do they provide you a proof? You can try tagging some previous forms and test file. One thing that came up, and Steve, maybe you can chime in on this. I'm pretty sure if you want to tag a 10Q, it's got conventional XBRL, you can't cover page tag it. It's an all or nothing for inline XBRL. I believe the entire thing has to be inline XBRL.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and you know, review with the SEC viewer. It's always kind of been a bit of a bugaboo for me that the SEC viewer is kind of the primary thing. When the instance data is viewable by any particular, you know, or readable by any particular computer, but the viewer becomes the standard thing. That's what people expect to see. It's what becomes the benchmark. You can look at it via a REL, and you can download that and install it on your own. Or when you use our software, we have a tool that puts it up there for you and lets you prove to it. So you can see what you're going to see once it's filed. Look at your current procedures and what you're doing right now for XBRL. Look at what you're going to be doing for inline XBRL as you phase in, and then incorporate the cover page tagging. If you've got different people in your organization that are responsible for that section of the document, then you're definitely going to want to make sure that they're all in tune and aligned to what's going on. And also you can consider reformatting certain information if it improves the tagging process. An example of that, again, is you know, how you might do the addresses and, you know, dealing with capitalization on New York versus, you know, initial caps and stuff like that. That might make things a little bit easier. A lot of that stuff will come out as you're going through the process of doing your first one and test filing it. And speaking of which, then it's always best to test file. I've been doing this all the way since the pilot system way back in the 80s. If you test file a document, particularly if it's something you're going to file live, that always helps you when you're dealing with the SEC and filer support. If you have a problem and you happen to miss the deadline by 5 minutes, but you have test filed the same document, you know, the day before or that particular day. So it's something that is worth doing. It doesn't really cost you anything other than a little bit of time. And particularly if it's coming close to the deadline, that's the early first few that you do. Another thing to keep in mind is there is EDGAR versus iXBRL cross-validation. It's not just things like we had before where it's the registrant name. Now if you're checking that you're a seasoned issuer and those types of things on the cover page, those things are cross-checked against the EDGAR XML. So it's good to have everything combined together and filed to make sure that that works fine. And I see we have some questions here. I don't know if you want to catch those now, Michelle, or if you want to do the CPE questions.
Sure, we could address the questions, you know, real quickly. So the first question that we got is, are you sure that the DEI is automatically imported into the US GAAP and IASB taxonomies?
That's actually a good question. I know that when you look at the way that the things are incorporated in the Q names when they're adjusted, not adjusted, but you reference them. Most of the time, all that stuff is referenced separately. A certain amount of the stuff has been slowly incorporated, and the way the DTS works, I think it just deals with that. So it's going to depend on the software vendor. I know that some vendors actually include everything under the sun, so you have dozens and dozens of taxonomies included, even if they're not used. Something that you can just check with your software vendor to see what they're doing. And I know some stuff is included, but not all.
Okay, and the second question is a little bit complicated here. Scott, I don't know if you can see it, but they indicate that the company has 3 principal executive offices. And initially they set up dimensions for each of the 3 countries to tag them. But each time they file, they were getting 5 warnings about not tagging the address. So when they removed the first country dimension, they didn't get any warnings. I'm not sure if that's a good thing, if that resolved the issue or just kind of cut off the warnings.
I think you're going to have a problem again with this validation. I would talk to filer support and CorpFin or even structured data about this. But when you're looking at certain of that information is going to be compared to the SEC's database. So they're going to go in and say, hey, that's like the company name problem. You have like /DE for incorporated in Delaware. That has to match that. And if you don't have that information, it's going to cause a problem. Can you add on to that, Steve? Do you?
Yeah, for this question in particular, the SEC, when it's doing validation, is expecting these values to be in the primary context of the report. So if you're doing a report that's 9 months ended, it's expecting that primary 9 months ended context to have values for the address. I don't think it's a problem to remove the dimension for the first one to comply with that. You would just want to add dimensions for each additional address. Yeah, I don't.
Yeah, so you can have an additional dimension on the same thing without dimensions on the first set of facts, right?
Right. It wouldn't change the meaning of the data.
Yeah.
You're just using dimensions to break down the other ones. And yeah, I mean, it's generally good practice to use the same dimensions in all cases. It's just in this case, the SEC for validation is looking at the primary context to determine you have addresses.
Yeah, I would try that and see what happens. And if that doesn't work, I probably would email structured data, I think.
Yeah. And just to go in a little bit more on that first question about the taxonomy, just take a look at the SEC's website for the accepted taxonomies, like US GAAP 2020. Under the list of schemas that are just included in US GAAP 2020, you see the US GAAP 2020 schema, and right below that, the DEI 2019 and 2018 schemas. So they're included directly in the 2020 GAAP taxonomy.
Wasn't that causing some problems too with crossing across 2019 versus, because some of those things were incorporated, you couldn't actually go backwards?
I remember something vaguely like that. I just don't remember exactly what the problem was, but I do remember there's some kind of problem like that, but I'm not sure the specifics.
The other thing too, if you email structured data, definitely give yourself some time. They're pretty good with their answers and stuff, but we have noticed too, it sometimes takes a while for them to get back to you.
It's taken anywhere from 2 or 3 hours to 2 or 3 weeks.
So they also may want to have a call then.
Yeah.
Okay, Michelle?
It depends when the filing season's going on.
I'll go ahead and stop share here so you can pull up the CPE.
Yeah, no, thank you. Okay, this is just letting me share everything here, but that's okay. Great, well, thank you. Thanks very much. I am going to go to poll questions now. And so for those of you getting CPE, again, make sure that you respond to these. So this is our third poll. And the question, what does the transformation bool ballot box perform? Does it convert various items, checkbox characters to true or false values? Does it convert any value to true, or does it convert any value to false? So just take a look at that and take a few minutes to respond.
I guess what, while they're answering, I don't know if this violates the CPE thing. One of the panelists came in and did say that it is in GAAP, but it's not in the IFRS.
Oh, that's interesting. But I think people should feel confident that their software will accommodate whatever taxonomies they need.
I'm looking at the SEC's website for supported standard taxonomies. IFRS 2019 for schemas lists out the IFRS 2019 taxonomy, the DEI 2019 and 2018 schemas as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, I'm going to shut down this poll. We'll go to our last poll. Okay, and this one is, which of the following is not a feature specific to inline XBRL versus traditional XBRL? Is it dimensions, transformations, or exclusions. So just take a couple seconds to look at this and respond. And while we're waiting for this to close, to cycle through, I want to thank Scott and Steve from NovaWorks, who did a great job really doing a lot of research, bringing their expertise to bear. And Scott, again, is the chair of the Domain Steering Committee and has done a tremendous amount of work in taxonomy development and software development, and has really been a huge help to our organization and moving XBRL forward. So we'll take another 10 seconds here. Okay, I'm going to shut this down. And I just wanted to bring up another program that we have coming up. We have a session on working with the FERC taxonomy that's going to be held in June. This is for members only, so if you are not a member, you may want to think about joining XBRL US to learn more about the taxonomy that the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission recently developed and finalized. And we'll be doing an in-depth walkthrough and helping vendors get ready to start working with public utilities that will need to begin reporting in XBRL format sometime next year. So that's just one event coming up in mid-June. And I also want to mention, I forgot to put it on the screen here, but just make sure that you're using the data quality rules. We have a tremendous number of rules available for both US GAAP and IFRS reporting. And the use of those rules, which is freely available for everybody, will definitely improve the quality of your own XBRL filing. So with that, I want to thank everybody for joining. And again, thanks very much to Steve and to Scott for joining us today. And hopefully we'll see you at our next session in June. Thanks very much.
My pleasure. See ya.
Bye now.